Digital accessibility specialist. I've just taken over running the Meetup from Al Duggan. How long have you been doing it, Al? Was it about 2 years? Just under 2 years. So yeah, Al has took this Meetup from something pretty small and turned it into like the amazing event that we all get to enjoy every month here. So I hope I can do the same for us all. If you want to find out a little bit more about me, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. So our event this month is a little bit earlier than we normally do it. We would normally do it towards the third week of the month, but some of you may know 16th of May is Global Accessibility Awareness Day this year, and there is a whole heap of stuff going on. Too many events that I can talk about right now, but we decided not to do something on Global Accessibility Awareness Day because so many other people are putting stuff on, and we do this every month. So if you haven't heard of this before, check out globalaccessibilityawarenessday.org. It's the longest URL, but check that out. At the top is a link to events. I had a look today and I picked out some of the ones that I thought looked really good. So in London, there's the UX Professionals Association are doing one in London. Microsoft are doing something in Reading, I think. And Barclays are doing something in Jersey, I think it was. Interestingly, Barclays Digital Eagles in Jersey. And then there's a lot of stuff online as well, so virtual events that you can get involved in. So check it out, a lot of good stuff happening in and around the 16th of May. So after tonight, we won't be back for about 6 weeks. So we'll do something in June, but we're going to have a bit of a break. I was also asked to give a quick shout out to something called the Tech for Good Awards. Anyone heard of that before? Yeah, cool, okay. So I think this is the 9th year it's been running, and entries close on the 10th of May. So Mark from AbilityNet asked me to just do a little shout out for this, so check that out if you have something you want to enter. The awards are all about using technology to make a positive change in the world. So the winner last year I think was an app called Be My Eyes. Has anyone heard of Be My Eyes? Or is a user, yeah? So if you haven't heard of it, it's a very cool app where people who are blind or partially sighted can connect with you via a phone. So if they need help identifying something, for example, they can literally make a call out, say I need help to identify something, and it might come through to your phone, and then you can kind of see through their camera and go, oh yeah, it's a can of Coke or something like that. So yeah, check that out, Tech for Good Awards. If you want to use the Wi-Fi today, O2 Wi-Fi is what you need to connect to. It's going to ask you for a few details like your name, phone number and stuff, but use the Wi-Fi because if you want to ask questions, we've got a couple of ways you can do that this evening. So we'll have microphones at the end of the talks, but we had some feedback a few months ago that sometimes people don't always want to grab a mic and ask a question for whatever reason, and that's cool. So Alistair found a website called Slido where you can answer questions, so you can ask questions via your phone or your laptop. So if you go to slido.com, and then there's an event code, you'll see right on the home page, you just pop in the code 3203, and that should connect you to the event that we've got set up for tonight. And you can ask a question, and they should come through to me and Raf, and then we can ask them out for you at the end. So quick hands up exercise, I'm going to get you to help me with this, because I'll forget them. So who's first timer today? Okay, about 20 or so, I think. Okay, who works for? Okay, so tonight, 2 really good talks. We're super lucky today to have, decided to start working again now. Super lucky to have Marcy Sutton joining us, all the way from just near Seattle, right? So Marcy's going to be talking about empathy-driven development using React.js and gatsby.js. So that's going to run until 8. So the time is a little bit different today. We're going to have a break at 8 until 8:30. And then afterwards, Matthew's going to be talking about how to use aria landmark roles. And you're going to be talking about the extension you built as well, right? Yep. So aria landmark roles and also an extension that Matt's built that is all available for us to use as well. And then at the end, go to the pub. The Sir Christopher Hatton. It's on a map this time. It's very close to the office. So we literally go out the door, take a left for about 100 yards, and then cross over the road, and there's a pub there. It's reasonably quiet. We try to pick venues that are not too noisy so we can have a conversation. Although Thursday nights, some venues now have DJs, so we've changed venue, but yeah, this one seems to be okay. So quick thanks to all of our sponsors for tonight. Huge thanks to Barclays, first of all. So Barclays very generously have sponsored us for the entire year. So putting on these events, doing things like the live captions, for example, the videos. So we have videos recording at the back and all that goes onto YouTube. All of that is possible because Barclays give us the money to be able to pay people to do that for us. So round of applause for Barclays, please. And then another request for this evening. Is there anyone here that works in higher education? 2, 3, 4, yeah, sometimes. Okay, so maybe if you could try and grab me in the break. David, who's our contact at Barclays, is working with the Business Disability Forum. They're looking to do a piece of research with the universities as to why there is a lack of accessibility training in the curriculum at universities. So you can speak to me in the break if you want, and I can put you in contact with David, or his details are here as well. If you want to take a note of them, he's on Twitter, or his email address is there as well. Thank you to Sainsbury's for the amazing venue. Hosting us, like, this is the best meetup venue, to steal your phrase, the best meetup venue in London by far. So thank you to Sainsbury's. Round of applause, please. While we're talking about the venue, just a few notes about the venue itself. If you need the toilet, they are back the way that we came in. Gents are on the left and ladies are on the right. Litter, this is probably the biggest request of the evening. The venue is always spotless when we come in, so we must leave it in the same way, right, when we leave. So we're all allowed to bring our drinks in, but please make sure you take any litter, your drinks with you at the end, so that Raf and I don't have to pick up rubbish, because I hate doing that. And then there are no planned fire drills for this evening, so if the fire alarm goes off, it could be the real deal, and we should all leave in an orderly fashion. Fire exits are again back where we came in, so just before you get to the lifts, on the left and the right, there are 2 emergency exits there. Big thank you to MyClearText. Is it who has seen live captioning before? I have now. Okay, so there's some people that maybe have never seen it before. So the text you see on the screen now is being produced by Orla, who is a real person. Not auto-captioning. So yeah, to me, it's like magic. Like, it's like she's playing a keyboard, but somehow sentences come out of that. I don't really understand how it works, but it's amazing. So thank you to MyClearText. And then thank you to the guys at the back, Peter and Lee from Meetup Video. So again, if you don't know Meetup Video, they do a really fantastic service where they can record your meetups and get the files processed, get them up onto YouTube for you. So thank you to Meetup Video as well. Round of applause, please. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Marcy now. We're going to do a quick switch of laptops. Hopefully that goes smoothly. And then all being well, we'll crack on with the talks.
Okay, hello everyone. Time to see if this goes smoothly.
It did when you weren't here.
Is this yours? Thank you. Okay, well, as Andy said, I'm Marcy, and super excited to be here. It's my first time at this meetup. He also mentioned I live near Seattle, Washington, back in the States. I co-run the Accessibility Seattle group, so I love coming to accessibility meetups just because we hear about such great things that we can use in our work, regardless of what role we have. So pretty excited to be here, and don't see anything yet. Oh, I didn't get it pushed in all the way.
I'll plug it in.
Hopefully that was it. Oh, it looks promising. There it goes. Parallels is trying to take over. Okay, so we're going to embark on a bit of an experimental journey. I have a React and Gatsby application that I'll give you a demo of what this looks like and what Gatsby is and all of that. But what I really want you to take away from this talk is a process of looking at React and JavaScript applications and trying to debug them and figure out what's wrong so that you can either fix them or communicate to developers what's missing for accessibility. It is unfortunate that a lot of JavaScript-heavy applications and websites are not built with accessibility. There are some, and we're trying to change that and do the best we can. It is true that some simpler websites with only HTML and CSS can be a bit more accessible, but it is possible to make an accessible JavaScript application. So we're going to talk about what that process is like, starting with debugging and looking at things that are broken so that we can try and either fix them or recommend fixes to people. So I recently joined a company called Gatsby.js, and it is a startup. We're all remote, pretty much, but Gatsby is a website building framework that's built on top of React. So I recently picked up Gatsby to build a new version of my own website. And what I really like about it is that I can use modern tools like React and lots of JavaScript and plain CSS. I'm a big fan of regular CSS. But it will output static web pages with HTML that render from a server, just like traditional HTML pages do. And they're really fast. So it's great for performance, much better than the predecessor of my site, which was a WordPress site. WordPress is great. It enables a lot of workflows. But sometimes the pages that it would create are not really fast. And you have to do a lot of work to make them work better on mobile. So what Gatsby does is allow you to create these really fast web pages, and I'm bringing this accessibility element to the company. Fortunately, there's lots of people there that care about accessibility already, so it was a great foundation. So I'll tell you more about Gatsby as we look through this application. So if you want to follow along, I haven't quite pushed up the current version of this application, but I will after tonight when I'm out of here with more internet connection. But it will be on my GitHub, and my GitHub name is Marcy Sutton, and then the repo is empathy-driven-development. And I can share it on Twitter after tonight. So we're going to do a journey through this application that I've built intentionally with accessibility problems, which is kind of difficult to retrain my brain or break it for a minute to try and make something really inaccessible. And we have the opportunity of making this interactive. So if you have questions, if you want to poke more at something, feel free to either raise your hand and we can give you a microphone, or you can use the Slido app, sounds like. Andy, are you going to be monitoring that? Okay, so you have options. So feel welcome to just ask, because we have this good sized room and we have this unique format that we can work with. So let's look at this application. It's got a few components in it. So we're primarily going to be looking at components, so smaller chunks of user interfaces that are built with React and CSS, and they output CSS and HTML. But I've used a lot of patterns that are common out there that I see people get wrong a lot. And we'll look at a sidebar that's like a sliding menu thing. There's a couple of forms on here, which pretty common are not made accessible. I have a carousel that I have taken from w3schools.com, which I always had a hunch that W3 Schools, I'm not a huge fan of theirs, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I went and looked at their carousel tutorial, and I really figured out why. And then we've got a modal dialogue. And so this is like just the beginning. Like we're definitely not going to cover all of it. I'm not covering everything there is to know about JavaScript applications. We're just going to look at the process. So that's the primary takeaway, is the process of debugging and coding for accessibility. I do have some resources in this README that I'll share on Twitter and afterwards that, there's some tips in here for developing for JavaScript applications, reminding all of us of like, who are we building stuff for? And especially at mainstream conferences where I tend to hang out a lot, I'd like to remind people that, if you're building websites and applications, are for people, right? Isn't that what we're doing here? And I feel like developers and designers and business people, like the whole business sometimes, just like they get distracted by the shiny things and don't make things that work for people. So that's what I care a lot about. There's also some resources on testing, like manual testing, which is a really great place to start. There's some automated testing and so on. So let's go over to the browser. I think, if I can remember which. I've identified a couple of problems. The next thing that I would do after kind of figuring out which controls are not reachable, so in the POR of perceivable, operable, understandable, robust, we have found that there's stuff that isn't reachable or operable. So we can fix that. So the next thing that I would do is probably use a browser extension. And I used to work at DQ, who makes the Axe extension, so I have that installed. We'll use that. And I can run an analysis on any web page. I could run it on a local file URL if I go and change the options a little bit, but I've got this running on localhost, so I can go run this. And it found a number of buttons in this form that have icons. So they were reachable, but they didn't have what's called accessible names. So that's something we could go and fix as well. Like if it has an icon, it needs some sort of a text label to make it more accessible in assistive technology. So we've got 3 of those. There is some color contrast issues, and like visually looking at this, the one item that really stood out to me that would need to be fixed was this white text of outdoor trip organizer. It's over kind of a, lavender periwinkle blue color on the background, and I've sort of trained my eye to identify text that I think doesn't meet color contrast ratios. So that text color, I guess I'll show you how I would debug that right now. So in the Axe extension, I can hit Inspect Node, and it will take me over to the Chrome Developer Tools. And now in Chrome, there is this fantastic tool in the Dev Tools. So I went into the Styles panel, so Elements panel, then off to the side, there's a Styles area. And if I click on a color swatch, I get a color contrast ratio tool now with these lines that'll show you for WCAG, AA, and AAA what color values would work on top of that background color. So it looks like white is a no-go with this blue background color, but if I drag it down into the dark grays or blacks, then my contrast ratio is above the threshold. So that I've found, like that workflow of using an extension like Axe and then going over to the dev tools and finding a color that works, it's awesome. Especially if you're working with a design team and you just need to change it a little bit and don't tell anyone and get away with it. Because then it might still look close enough to brand colors or the colors that they thought a lot about, but they don't quite meet contrast ratios. Maybe you can just fudge it a little bit. And so this color contrast picker is a game changer. So, and I think now if you hover over an item, I've been hearing about there's some hover part of dev tools, and if anyone knows how to get to that, I don't actually know anymore. So when I hover, and
be in the select element. I can't remember what the tool's called. The left-hand button on the dev tools.
oh yes, okay. So in DevTools, there is a select an element button. It's like the first in the DevTools tab bar. Which, by the way, side note, the Chrome team is actually doing a lot of work to make the dev tools more accessible, which is really awesome. I know that they've started with the elements and like styles, and if you're using either Chromevox or VoiceOver now, you can do a lot more to actually manipulate the DOM in the browser, so that's pretty cool. It's not quite there for just regular keyboard support without assistive technology, which was my biggest wish list item, because that's the thing about like all of the improvements that we can make for people who really rely on the keyboard and they can't bail out and just start using a mouse or a trackpad. For a lot of us that have like repetitive use injuries and things, that keyboard support can really enable us to keep getting our work done. So it would help everyone if they did a little bit more for keyboard users. But if I use this button, now, thank you for the tip. So now if I have the DevTools open and I've selected an element, I can go hover over it and it'll give me some of that same information. So it's giving me the name of the element, which is an anchor. It's giving me some dimensions, the font color, which is white. It tells me a little bit about the font, and then the contrast ratio. Like, how cool is that there's a contrast ratio right there? I mean, I had to hover to get to it, so anytime I even hear the word hover now, I'm like, ooh, does it have keyboard support? But that's so cool, because that's mainstreaming accessibility debugging for color contrast, which when they ran Axe Core, which is the underlying JavaScript in the Axe extension, when the Chrome team ran that against the HTTP archive, which I think is the top 500,000 websites or something, I forget how many, but color contrast is far and away the #1 accessibility problem, which is why it's a good thing to train your, like if you can see the screen, if you can train your eye to kind of identify colors that don't pass the sniff test, so we say, then that gives you a little bit of a head start to go and debug. But that's okay, because now we have way better tools. Like everyone can go and debug this now. And there's other tools I use, like the Paciello Group's Contrast Analyzer, which is a desktop application. I like that one because I can test colors in PDFs, other things that aren't in the browser, which is really cool. So we've got another thing to fix here. So let's go back to Axe. So we've got some color things we could fix. There's the heading, and then I have a link down here at the bottom. It says copyright 2019 built with Gatsby, and then this gray link. I mean, I couldn't even really see it there. It's funny, I put this in here intentionally and then I couldn't even see it, so I kind of forgot. Which I think is how stuff happens. Like maybe you got a theme that you downloaded and you only changed some of the stuff, and it happens. So now we have these tools that make it so much easier to figure out what's going on. There's some missing form labels. So this is where these tools are super helpful, because for a lot of folks who don't use or test with assistive technology very often, this can just point out to you what's missing. And in this case, I have a couple of inputs that have our friend, the placeholder attribute, which it's like in quotes to me, it's kind of like a frenemy that like, we love the placeholder. It's cool, it puts text in the input. But people rely on it a lot, and they don't add a real label. And in a lot of assistive technology and browser combinations, the placeholder is not enough. And I've heard some discussions about maybe they'll make placeholder part of what's called accessible name calculation, where they will count it as part of it. And it's kind of not across the board, it's not consistent. But enough people have used placeholder instead of a label that like maybe we'll get that eventually. Yeah, it's like, would we rather kind of lower the bar and just make it work? Or, I don't know, we'll just run the risk of people not adding labels, so we might as well expose something. But if you want to debate, we can debate about it. Okay, so we've got labels missing. There's a couple of text inputs. There is a select here for the type of trip. So this organizer would be like you type in the name of a trip, the name of an area that you're going to, which might hint, what sort of activities are you going to do there? Is it snowy? Are you going to like take your animals on a hike or something? Go play outside, because I need to get away from the computer sometimes and get outside. So what I would do with this organizer is like catalog these things and then maybe generate a gear list for me to go check off. Like, oh, I'm trying to get out the door quickly. I'm going to generate a list of all of the things that I would take with me. And so that's what this sort of form data collection is intended for. So there's a select here with a number of items, like going out in a van, going out in the backcountry, or going out on a kayak. So I need to go add a label to that one. There is an item here without a landmark. There's no main landmark here at all. So there's two rules in Axe that are sort of similar. So there's one that says all page content must be contained by landmarks. And looks like that's it already told us that it's everything that is in the main content area should be in a main landmark, but I didn't add one. So that's a pretty easy change. We can go and fix that. So we've got keyboard. We looked at color contrast. We looked at the Axe extension. The next step, we can go fix things, but like the next major thing I would do is run a screen reader. So we'll play VoiceOver. We could go click through this app a little bit more and go see what else is in here. Here is the wonderful W3 Schools carousel. So you can probably guess what this is like. So it's got some images. It has previous and next buttons. Here's a picture of me with my dog as a puppy when he was too small and we had to carry him. There are the little dots at the bottom of the carousel that you can click. But if we tab through the page again, let's go through our sidebar that's not actually open or not actually hiding the items. And I can't get to anything on this carousel. Maybe the previous and next buttons, but no, I'm like way past it. Let's see. I can't actually tell, because I think, let's go look. We can go inspect. This is what I would really do, is go inspect, look at the dev tools. Oh yeah, here we go. So there's two anchor tags. This is code I took directly off of the internet. I did not write this. They used anchor tags with no href attribute, which I see a lot. So for some reason, when you're new to HTML and maybe you don't know that much about it, you might pick an element that's not, like you're not using it to its full potential. So I think a button element would probably be better because this carousel is going to require JavaScript. So a button element might be a good fit. We're not gonna like progressively degrade this carousel. Like if we were gonna do progressive enhancement for this carousel, we would just have a list of images in the markup and you'd just see them all and it wouldn't be interactive. But the anchor elements indicate that we would be navigating somewhere. And that requires an href attribute to make it actually focusable. So these aren't focusable, which is a bummer, but that's a pretty easy fix with the buttons because the power of the sort of like logic that's happening is all in JavaScript anyway, so the anchor's not going to get us much. If we look at the dots, that's just a big box of spans. So it's like you can put click events on anything. People do. I think my biggest disappointment is that this was on a tutorial. On the #1 site that you search for like carousel how-to, like W3 Schools comes up first, which is why it has such a bad reputation because they have things like this. But I tried to do a little bit for accessibility. I heard of that aria live attribute before, so maybe it's got some accessibility, right? Let's turn on VoiceOver and see, or hear. Let's listen to what VoiceOver has to say about this carousel.
VoiceOver comment created. You are no longer connected to Hangouts.
Okay,
we are trying to
Hangouts.
reconnect for you. Merge state.
Okay,
Add more
GitHub.
commits by pushing to the feedback widget.
Does that
Branch
happen
on.
to anyone else? See GitHub open and it just takes over?
Period. Code owner review.
GitHub taken over. This is what I want.
You are online. Merge
that's-
state. Add more commits by pushing to the use MDX.
Oh,
Use
man.
MDX. Branch on.
Give me a
Christopher
break. Okay, so there's this thing that happens. I've also noticed it with WCAG, the standard, like if you have it open in your browser, and also GitHub apparently. There's just something with the way those web pages are marked up. Maybe they have some aria lives in them that it'll just announce like over and over again, and you just have to close the tabs. So my apologies. Let's see if I can actually get this carousel to give us any action.
Home inspiration, gear packing, list friends, outdoor trip organizer inspiration, backpacking with reindeer, the labradoodle, camping with the dog at a wilderness lake, carrying puppy reindeer on a mountain hike, carrying puppy reindeer on a mountain hike, carrying puppy reindeer on a mountain hike, heavy left pointing angle quotation mark ornament, heavy right pointing angle quotation mark ornament, copyright sign 2019, built with Gatsby group.
Wow, it's just really going for it.
F5 button, backpacking with reindeer, the labradoodle, camping with the dog at a wilderness lake, carrying puppy reindeer on a mountain hike, carrying puppy reindeer on a mountain.
Man. Really fun times, you guys. So there's something really bad going on with this carousel. And let's go look at what's happening. So it sounded like, I mean, if we go back and look at this carousel, there was aria live on it. So that's the danger of using using aria when you don't fully understand it, is that someone might just go slap it on a carousel and just go, I'm done, but they don't actually test it and understand what that is for. So aria live is intended to announce changes to content. So when you change something in your markup, say you're like, you have an announcement off to the side of a user interface that something was saved. You don't want to send the user's focus there, but you want to announce something that's happening. So there would be some use case for that in a carousel. Unfortunately, this carousel has it's not quite a factorial, but it has the alt text for each of these images builds each time. So if we start at image number 1, let's go back here. Image number 1, that one, when I listened to it earlier, that one sounded fine. So it has one alt attribute, and this is using the picture element to create some responsive images. So it looks a little bit different than a plain image carousel. But if we look at image number 2, now there's 2 alt texts in one, and so on. If we keep going, this is like a real thing. I didn't just make this up. Somebody told me that they were testing a site and it had a factorial carousel in it. And like the alt text really, like you go through 1 through 9. By the time you got to 9, I think that would actually be multiplying them. So it ends up like 32,000 instances of the same alt text. It would just crash the browser. But sometimes math can be used like really poorly. And this is an instance where I was like, can I make a carousel that's like almost a factorial? And you can. And it makes really irritating aria live announcements. So that's something pretty easy to fix. Like go remove the math that's adding all of these alt texts together. But what I want you to take away from this is, I don't know, both a little bit of empathy for people who are new to aria and like maybe gently hand them a screen reader and an automated checker to be like, did you test this? Just because I know, like when I first started using aria, I got it wrong as well. And I remember, handing something off to a colleague who was blind, and he's like, this would be better without the aria in it, actually. And we got pretty far with focus management, which is a big topic we're gonna go look at. And then like just using text and things, so that when you manage focus, there's text in it. Use the right HTML elements for the job, and that can get you pretty far without even needing aria. So, all right, so I think we've gotten a good survey. We've done a deeper dive into debugging. Now let's go fix some stuff. So if I go back over to, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I'll give you a little bit of a tour here. So in a Gatsby site, your source, I guess the first thing to start with, really briefly, if you're new to Gatsby, is that you have a configuration file, which is like, you might have some metadata in it. If you have plugins, things like you're pulling content from your file system, so that's where all my images are coming from. You have the ability to do certain things when it uses Node.js as a server, so you can do some server-side things. That's how you output these static HTML files, even though you're writing in React. So that's pretty cool. Most of the code lives in the source directory. So there are pages, which are just like you would imagine, like a page. So you have a JavaScript component for a page. And I won't dive really into GraphQL, but that's another big building block of Gatsby is you have this data layer that you can reference in your code. And so that's how I'm getting images. Like there's an image on the home page, I'm just getting that one instance. There's some lovely CSS and JS here, there's CSS like inline. They do a pretty good job of taking that code and actually outputting CSS so that it's not just like gross inline or like JavaScript inlines. I don't know. They do a better job of handling it when you're building your site out so that everything kind of like gets packaged and has better performance. So I don't judge it too hard. So they do a pretty good job. At least there's an image component that is, so when we were looking at the debugged browser, there was like a picture element and a bunch of like data URIs, and it was like, why isn't that just a plain image tag? Well, they're doing a lot of heavy lifting for responsive images and performance. And one thing I'm really happy about is that they will, if you don't put an alt attribute on the Gatsby image component, they will output an empty alt for you, which is really nice. Like it would be better to have an empty alt attribute than have it read a data URI or like a cached file URL or something like a bunch of random characters. Like we're not in web publishing where everything had clean file names anymore. It's usually like some completely robotic file name that no one needs to hear in a screen reader. So the alt attribute will get put onto the image by default. Okay, so we've got, that's our home page, and it's got this trip planner. That sounds promising. So trip planner, let's go look at that. So this is a component. It lives in the components directory. So I can kind of group things together, like there's carousel items, there's menu items, there's a trip planner folder that has this like trip planner form thing. And so in the trip planner, this is where the markup that ends up as this static HTML. That's where this lives. And it's a templating language called JSX. And so it renders just plain HTML, but it's sort of super powered. So we can add a lot of logic in here. We can have some really fancy what's the word I'm looking for? Validation, error validation. That would be nice because you sort of need some JavaScript for that. But I can tell already that there's a number of items we could fix. So there's a button with the title attribute of my trips. Title technically is part of accessible name calculation, so that one's not quite as bad. But there's a number of these divs that have a class name of label. That's another good one. Anyone raise their hand? Have you seen a div with a class of label on it? Yeah, it's like, just come on, make it a label element. So we can make those label elements. I'm gonna go ahead and just change this title to an aria label on my trips. That button, a lot of these buttons don't have proper accessible names on them. So for assistive tech, it just does not give you enough information. So there's another one that's an expand button. We'll just change that. Let's see, here's another div with a class name of label. We'll change that to a label. I think there's one more here with this select. Change that one. Oh, here's a button that, I guess it has text in it, so it just says go. Oh, here's a button with no label on it. Aria-label, we'll call it a calendar. Maybe that's like opens a date picker or something. And then I think there's one more here. We'll say aria label, expand. Expand what? I'm not really sure because it's not actually fully functional. So you really want to describe in the control what it's going to do. So we've got those so far. This form is in a lot better shape. Another thing that we saw that we could go and fix is that heading. This white text, let's go fix that. So we picked a good color. I think black would be fine. It looks like it's an inline style, so I'm gonna go find where that lives. So if I go back to our homepage that we saw a minute ago, there is a component here called a layout component. And this layout component is sort of like my template that wraps my content. And I can kind of put stuff in the layout component so that I don't really have to worry about it. I can just focus on writing what's relevant to this page. So I need to go over to the layout component. And so components are reusable things. You can pass data to them. You can like take a component and then change it a little bit if you want like a custom version of that component. So this layout component pulls in from our Gatsby config file. There was some site metadata in there, like the site name. You could have a description and all kinds of good things in there. So I'm using GraphQL to pull that in. And if you're curious more about kind of the mechanics of Gatsby, there's a ton of really great documentation. So you can check that out. The important things here, I'm going to close this sidebar. So in the markup that this layout component is sort of wrapping around our page contents includes a menu, so that's another component. And so this is sort of unique to JSX, so it's a lot like HTML, but you can put other components in it. So when you see something that you don't recognize as an HTML element, maybe it has a capital letter to start, that's probably a good hint that there's a component. And if we scroll up to the top of the page, there is an import up at the top that's importing another component called menu. It's also importing a header. There's a sign-up form that's the one that's going into the modal, and then some CSS. So I sort of have a mix of CSS, like it's sort of just like polluted across this thing, because that's pretty common. Like a lot of apps are not very well organized. Maybe some spring cleaning would be a good thing to go and fix. So we've got this menu. That was another big item that needed to get fixed. But some quick wins that we could do. Ooh, here's another good one. A div with a class name of main content. Has anyone seen that before? Yeah, it's like, if you're adding a CSS class that you think of as semantic, that's a good tip or a good hint that there's probably a better element for that, including the main element. So this will fix the two axe score rules that we saw that the content was not being wrapped in a landmark. And the main, you want only one. It should be top level, so not contained in other landmarks. So we have a header here, and header is a component called header, but it uses the semantic HTML5 header element. It's just like we have a component with the same name so that it's like easily memorable in your code base, but then it has some extra stuff in it, like the H1. Oh, and sure enough, here is our big H1 with the color white. So if I change that to black or a dark gray, that'll help. Oh, here's another issue right here. So when you're in an app like this and it's just littered with accessibility problems, as you go to poke around, you might identify other problems while you're in there. And part of the challenge is that you might not be able to fix everything in one go. Like maybe you can, like maybe your team will just be like, cool, fix it. But sometimes you really have to get approval, like maybe you need to get the work onto the schedule. There's some bureaucracy that you have to negotiate around, even if it's like, just let me fix it. So yeah, it's gonna depend on your situation what you can like get away with in the moment, but if I saw this in an app, I would just go fix it. So there's a div. That was the modal sign up one that we couldn't reach. I'm going to give it an aria label of open, let's see, newsletter sign up. I mean, it is a modal, but that's not really the important thing. It's like, what do you want the user to know about this button? Especially this is for a screen reader user. So I'm going to say open newsletter sign up. And that's another accessibility issue that we saw. So I guess for mechanics, we had our sidebar. It would be great to go and fix some of that. So we've got this menu. Two or three things that I would like to do in the time that we have are, so when this menu slides out, and this is a really common thing in not only React applications, but JavaScript applications in general, is that when you have these layers and modal dialogues, you need to handle focus when it opens. And then it did work with the escape key, that's awesome, but it should send your focus back to whatever element you came from. And we need to hide the inactive items. And there's a number of ways you can do that. I'm going to use the HTML inert attribute, which is available in Chrome behind a flag. You can use a polyfill from the Web Incubator community group. And that will, you can put it on content that maybe it's like, when we have this modal open, actually, this is another example. The layer behind, you can kind of see it back there. So it doesn't have CSS display none on it, but it's not supposed to be interactive. So for a keyboard user, if that background was not disabled, or for screen readers too, they can get stuck back there. And especially in applications where there's like multiple layers, that can be very disorienting. So inert will allow us to easily prevent assistive technology from like even identifying that content and from reaching it with the keyboard, because you kind of need both. So we're gonna play with inert. Oh yeah, and my close button is like completely broken, which I've also seen in a real app. Like if you don't have automated tests, and I don't think we're gonna get to automated tests, we're pretty close to the end here, but there's stuff that just gets broken all the time. Like not only for accessibility, but for everyone. And like that might be some leverage for you to take to your teams. It's like, hey, I saw this feature was broken. We should have some automated testing for that, and we could test for accessibility as well. So that would be super cool. So this menu, the first thing I think that we could probably do in the time that we have is to go and add that inert attribute. So before I get ahead of myself, so menu, it's a component. It's imported up here at the top from a folder called menu, and then there was a folder or a file in there. This menu component is a React component. So a lot of what Gatsby will do is sort of like, they handle a lot of the heavy lifting with React componentry for you. So it's actually a lot easier. That's part of why I like it and why I started using it. This is sort of a bridge to the older, like more independent way of working with React. So it has a lot more code and stuff in it. But it still works. They still work together because they're all React. So what we need, if I scroll down past all of these logic methods and things, so this is where you start to see where JSX is different than plain HTML. There are attributes with dynamic, like maybe class names get toggled on and off depending on the state. Like if it's inactive, you could use JavaScript to kind of change what CSS is doing and change how that impacts users. Here is a div with a click event on it. I think that's actually the layer. Which layer is that? That's like a menu wrapping layer. So we want to add the inert attribute so that it wraps everything inside of the menu, but not containing the button that we need to get to open it. So the menu icon, which a little bit of a tip, if you have a control, like a UI control with the word icon in it, maybe it's a way of identifying that like that's probably not keyboard interactive. So a menu button would have been better. And those are components that I would need to go fix in those files. So it's sort of a trail of like finding where the problems are. So this div, that's the one that contains everything. I think this is the one we want. Let's go try. So how I'm going to add this in JSX. So it will render to HTML, but I can use some logic inline. So I'm going to say, I guess, inert. And I am going to add some stuff here. So we want it to actually put the attribute inert onto the element. And it says class name, by the way, because that's React's way of, like, class is a protected word in JavaScript because it's like a JavaScript code thing. So class name will output class, which is the valid HTML, just as like a side note. So for inert, we need some sort of a state. If the menu is open, so I think that would be like this dot props, which are the like data that's being passed into this component. Let's see, is there like an is open? Yes, this dot state dot is open. So it's state, not props. So those props are like you're giving it a new title or like some data, and state is reacting to what the user is doing. Like maybe you want to programmatically open this thing by like hitting the slash key or something like really random. Back in jQuery time, that would have been a lot of event handling, like manual, updating the DOM and doing a lot of that. Now we can pass props and state through React, and it's a lot easier to kind of react to what the user is doing. So this.state.isOpen, I'm going to put a ternary operator here, which is like an inline if-else. So if it is open, we want the inert attribute to be here. So I'm going to say inert, because it is a Boolean attribute, which means that it's just the presence of the attribute in HTML is what we want. So it would say inert on, this could be on a div or on a section or whatever element you're using, but it doesn't have a value. But we need to kind of trick React into adding it. So if it is open, we're going to add the inert attribute. If it isn't open, let's go see. And you know what we can do in case I'm just not getting this right in the moment, because live coding, it's an exploratory journey. We could just go manipulate it right here in the browser. And so that's what's really fun, is like you don't necessarily have to be, like I'm showing you things that some of which are really specific to React, but some are not. And one thing we could just do is go and open this and make sure we can identify which element we want to put it on. So I have this menu wrap. And if I close it, and I just go click in here and add attribute, so I hit the control key and add attribute, I can just say inert. And so it's in here, it's just the Boolean, so no value. And now if there we go, so my React foo is off. But we have still have a number of issues. However, that is one thing that's what we need to add to the markup to fix that one problem of not focusing in these items when the menu is closed. Something I am curious about is why our text color didn't change, because I changed that to black. So maybe my server isn't actually working or something. And it might be. So this is sort of my like control panel of what's happening is my terminal. So there's lots of good warnings, and I think actually what happened is like I had it sort of working and then I broke it intentionally, and it's probably like, I don't know, I maybe didn't get that quite right. So, because that should have changed in our header. We changed a number of items, like this color should be different. And it is not, but that's okay, because I think it's already 8. So hopefully, let's just change this. We'll just like fix some stuff real quick and dirty here in the browser. Yeah, I think like it didn't compile or something. That looks like what happened. So this is kind of cool actually in DevTools. If you change an element, it will update the closing tag for you. So you don't have to go and change it like, they're live updating it while I type. So I'm changing it from a div to a button. I can hit the enter key. The one I really wanted to change was this menu button. So that's a div. That should be a button. And it also needs a label. So maybe like aria label of open menu. And when the menu is, so when it's closed, you want to say open. When it's open, you want to change that label. So you should be updating it. And that's where those inline conditionals in React can be really useful, because you can actually change it on the fly. One other quick thing that I didn't really cover, and I think actually we weren't able to see a focus outline on this button because it was a div. So with that, I hope that you've kind of gotten a glimpse into the debugging process, because even if you're not a React developer, being able to go and look at some of these applications and understand like how did they get made that way? And sometimes it's just completely because people aren't educated about it. Sometimes, I don't know, there's just like lots of cooks in the kitchen and not everyone has the same skill level. So that's where we as accessibility professionals and passionate people can try to help a little bit. And Yeah, so if you've got some questions, I know we kind of just like rammed right through the question time. But yeah, so thanks so much for having me, and I hope it was beneficial. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I think can we do 5 minutes for questions? Is that okay, Ola? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to just run over by 5 minutes. We started at 5 past, so.
Oh, okay.
If you want to ask a question in the audience, Raf's got a mic. There's a couple on the website. First one is, so VoiceOver is on the Mac only.
Yes.
If you have Linux or Windows, what would you use to test speech?
So on Windows, I would recommend NVDA and JAWS, of course. JAWS has a license that you can technically use for 40 minutes at a time, but I think their terms of service say that you're not supposed to do that, so I would recommend NVDA.
Yeah.
And that's what DQ uses. They're one accessibility vendor, and NVDA is open source and free, and it's really good. And so I think it's solid enough, and enough people with disabilities use it that I would recommend NVDA. For Linux, I've heard Orca. Does anyone use anything else on Linux?
That's all I've heard of.
Just Orca. Yeah, I'm not a Linux user myself, but Windows I will frequently, so if I was going to test on Windows, I use Parallels now, which is a virtual machine software, and it really smooths out some of the like key mappings and like file system access on the Mac side and all of that stuff. It does require a license, but it's also good to have a physical Windows machine because there's some bugs that you just can't reproduce on virtual machines.
And then what automated testing do you normally use for regression testing?
For regression testing, yeah, so that's something we didn't quite get to today. In Gatsby, we use Cypress. So I actually have a tab here for a little utility called Gatsby Cypress. And Cypress is in the realm of like Selenium WebDriver, so an end-to-end testing framework that will open a real browser instance, which is more like what a user would be in. And I really like Cypress. They have a lot better documentation than Selenium, and it's just got like an interactive user interface that's pretty cool. I haven't tested it for accessibility, but you can also just use it like in your continuous integration. Write some automated tests that way. I just really like their APIs for regression testing. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Cool.
There's even a Cypress Axe utility that you can use, and it sort of injects Axe into the Cypress browser instance for you, and it's pretty slick.
Cool, thank you. So is anyone in the audience, then we can run a mic to you.
Hello.
Hi.
So to make the menu links disabled when the menu was closed, you use the inert polyfill. And I'd like to know, in your experience recommending using this polyfill, have you ever met some resistance from developers because it's a package that's got to be downloaded? And if that's the case, what alternative would you recommend?
Yeah, occasionally, that's a really good question. So occasionally, yeah, there might be reasons why you can't download a polyfill, maybe for performance reasons. I mean, a good reason to use it is that we're really trying to get it back into web standards so that it would just be available and be a standard. But some alternatives are, so this is why inert is so useful. I mean, you can use CSS. So when the menu was closed, I could use CSS display none or visibility hidden. Display none would affect the visual display, so you might need to use CSS animations and like change it at the beginning or the end of a keyframe animation. You can also, I mean, the way I've done it in the past is to add aria hidden of true, so that would go on the menu itself, and then every link inside of there would need tab index of -1. To make it so it's not reachable from the keyboard. That method of doing it is really hard because you have to walk the DOM. I mean, for pattern libraries and JavaScript frameworks, you don't have control over where these, like modal might be like buried, and actually inert might be tricky there too. So you don't always have control over the markup you're trying to disable. So in that case, maybe the aria hidden and tab index method would work, but you need some sort of a utility to go walk up the DOM tree, remember what tab index was on things, and then walk back down. Like, you know, you're like doing this walking. So that can be performance heavy as well. If you can just like have a modal dialogue that's like siblings to your content, that way it's really easy. It's kind of like an isolated thing that you can disable. This is just a really hairy problem, trying to walk the DOM. I did it in Angular, and it was some of the hardest code I've ever had to do. It's cool, but it's like, it's difficult. So yeah, if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. And yeah, voting in inert attribute in all the browsers. Like, I think really Chrome is the only one that has it behind a flag. And yeah, I hope that we can get some momentum there just because it solves such a big need that we have to disable things.
Thanks.
Cool. So we'll probably have to stop it there.
Yeah.
If any more questions, can people find you on Twitter?
Yes, Marcy
Yeah.
Sutton on Twitter. And there's also a web accessibility Slack that I run. It's web-a11y@slack.com. And you can tweet at me if you aren't already in that group. It's invite only right now until we get a better system. But that group is consistently really helpful. There's people in all time zones just like super ready to help. I think Scott O'Hara like works in all of the time zones. But yeah, if you ever have a question about technical accessibility or policy or events, there's an events channel in there and all kinds of good stuff. So yeah, maybe if there's enough interest from more than one person, maybe we can like do a group email or something like that.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks everybody.
Well, thank you so much. So running slightly behind, but if everyone can be back for 8:30 sharp, and then we've got time for Matt's talk. So yeah, there should be some drinks left, maybe some food, maybe. It smells like pizza in here. Maybe it's loose. So yeah, second talk of today is Matt from the Paciello Group. Matt, take it away.
Talk to you about landmarks, as it says there. But I wanted to start with a couple of questions that visitors to our sites might have. The first one is, what's on the page? And the second one is, how can I get there? Now, historically, headings have been a very popular method for getting around web pages. And when web pages looked a bit simpler, like this one, this is the Extremely Reliable Operating System web page. It was a research project, and it's a classic sort of computer science style web page. It's got headings, it's got links, it's got text, and nothing else. Now, it's quite easy if you're a visually browsing user to see your way around this page. You can see that there's three main headings, and if you are a visually browsing sort of person, you can use the up arrow, the down arrow, and the tab key to move around, and you can see the headings as they go past. If you happen to be using a screen reader, maybe you can't see the page so well, you can bring up a list of headings that might be on the page. This is an example of the sort of dialogue that would contain that information. There's also shortcut keys that screen readers provide for moving between headings. So that's all very simple and effective and efficient, but sites have evolved since then in a number of different ways. First of all, they've evolved in terms of the sophistication of the visual design of the site. This is the Paciello Group's homepage. That's my employer. I work with the Paciello Group, and we do accessibility stuff. So if you need any accessibility bits and bobs doing, please say hello. This is still a very simple page. It's got some main content in the middle, there's some links at the top, there's a footer at the bottom, and if it only had headings alone, it probably still would be quite easy to navigate because it's a simple page. But the design of this draws your attention to the middle and to the bits that are most important. And so it would be nice if perhaps there was some way of conveying that sort of feeling and that design to people who might not be able to appreciate it visually. This is a partial screen grab of a long and detailed and very interesting Wikipedia article about color perception deficit, or sometimes known as color blindness. And you're not supposed to be able to see this, but there's lots of images, there's lots of text, there's lots of headings there. And it makes perfect sense for it to be so many headings because it's a big detailed article. This is a sum of the headings, the heading tree of that particular article as reported by a screen reader. And there's a lot of detail in there, and that's great because the heading structure matches what you see on the page. But if we were to zoom in a little bit and just look at the top of the page, where the beginning of the article is, then we can actually see that there's some other areas on the page as well. There's something up in the top right, which is, there's a search box there, there's some other links about user accounts and the history of a document. And then on the left-hand side, there's a navigation bar, and that's got lots of links in it that seem to be quite clearly from the visual design to do with Wikipedia rather than this particular article. So again, there's some information coming from the visuals there that might not be apparent from just looking at the heading structure. Of course, we do a lot more things online these days. We do online shopping, and we also use online communication tools. Some people use email clients, calendars and stuff, and all within the browser. This particular screenshot happens to be of Google Wave, because I still miss it. There could well be headings on here, but there's lots of different panes, user interface type panes, and lists of messages and message content. So headings might not be quite enough just for this as well. So there's another thing that came around fairly quickly and has been with us for a while. It's a technique called skip links. Now, skip links work like this. You might go to a web page. This is a story on the BBC sports website. It's got interesting statistics about marathons, because that's a topical thing at the moment. And if you are browsing with the keyboard, the first time you press tab on the keyboard, up pops a skip link, and this takes you to the main content of the page. And when you follow the skip link, you get whooshed down the page to the main content. Now, that can save you a lot of time, depending on how much you get to skip over. Skip links are awesome. They are easily discoverable, because the convention is they're pretty much the first thing on the page, so they're easy to find. They allow you to avoid content that's repeated on many pages, and that could add up to quite a lot of content, and it saves the visitors of your site a lot of time. Now, the first time they visit the site, they might well want to explore it fully, but when they've come to your site for the 10th time and they know where they're going, being able to skip over that stuff is really, really useful. I'll just give a brief demonstration of how long it might take to skip over that content if it went for the fact that this site already has good skip links and headings. Just give you a quick idea of how noisy that can be. So turn on voiceover.
Voiceover on Safari. London Marathon 2019. You shrink how much 7. Heading level 2. Link.
So I'm going
Link.
to go
Sign
through
in.
some links.
Link BBC. Link. Link. Sport. Link. End search. You search the BBC.
Well, that
You are
sounds
currently
useful,
on a
but
text
I want
element.
to skip it.
Search end of beat banner. Link. End link. Link.
Still saying
Athletics.
links, so I'll just
You
carry
are
on
currently
going.
end of link. End of navigation main. You are currently on a main. Heading level 1. London Marathon 2019. You shrink how much 7 stats to make you go wow. You are currently
Okay,
voiceover
so
off.
that's how long it might take. Now, all of that navigational stuff is actually really good, and it's very well marked up, which is why I showed you on this site, because they've done a very good job with allowing you to skip things if you want to. But just imagine if you couldn't do that, and if you had to go through all that sort of thing every time, it could get annoying. So, skip links are awesome, but they do have some disadvantages or potential traps. One of them is that they only appear where the author has put them. So usually they're at the top because you start off at the top, and that's the most likely place you'll be when you want to skip over something repetitive, but you might be somewhere else on the page. They only go to the places where the authors have provided them for. So if it might say skip to content, but if you wanted to skip to something else, you might be stuck. And also in complex app-like settings, they might not be so useful. If you're using a web-based email program and you've got a list of messages on one side and you've got message content on the other, you might want to switch between those two quite a lot, but that would be difficult with skip links. And equally, you might have a search results for shopping items on one side and your shopping basket on the other. You might want to switch between the two. So again, skip links have some limits as to where they can be useful. So now we've got a new thing called landmark regions. What are landmark regions? Well, they're signposts to different areas of the page that might be useful, and we're talking about broad areas of the page. The key thing about landmarks is they are non-visual. You can't actually see the landmark, but that's by design, because it's supposed to be a complement to the visual design that you've already got on your page. And the key thing is that they are designed to facilitate random access between different regions of the page. So solving the problem of skip links, they're kind of like universal skip links, if you will. And they came about through the World Wide Web Consortium's Accessible Rich Internet Application, or aria, standards. That's where they were specified. And we've had them for quite a while now, and the support for them is very good. So just going back to the Paciello Group home page, the landmarks on that page would call out things like, there's navigation up here, this is the main content in the middle, oh, and this stuff at the bottom is probably contact information and other supporting links. And this is all the stuff that the visual design is telling you already, so this is the semantic counterpart to that. If we take a look at how a screen reader might report that, there's a tree here of landmarks. We see that there's one called banner, there's navigation, there's main, which is the main content, and then there's another one called content information, which corresponds to the footer. So that's all very nice and easy to navigate. So as a developer, how do you provide landmarks to your users? Well, it's quite easy. Let's have a look at a good example so far. It's a search box, because that's quite a common activity that people will want to do. You might already have a text box and a button that together form your search functionality as far as the user is concerned. And you might have those grouped in a div or even a field set or something else like that. So if you wanted to highlight this as a search landmark, all you do is add a role attribute and set its value to search. And that says, I'm the search functionality on this page. So let's try the classic one, main content. Back when my colleague Steve Faulkner was researching how people put together web pages for seeing about introducing the main element, what he found was that loads of people have something like this: div ID equals content, or div ID equals main, or maybe it's got a class of content or a class of main. And in those cases, what you can do to say this is a main landmark is you can just put role equals main on there, and then that becomes the main landmark on the page. Now, this has got ID of main and role of main, and programmers generally don't like repetition. And as it goes with Immortals from Highlander, there can only be one main. So you don't need the ID if you want to be brave or just obsessive about not repeating yourself. So you can just have div role equals main. But as Marcy's talk alluded to, and in fact demonstrated, things have got even easier than this. HTML5 brought loads of elements that bring with them landmark roles. So you can actually just have a main element. Couldn't be easier than that. So simple. Actually, it's not quite true that there can only be one, or there must only be one. You can have more than one main element as long as the other ones are invisible. So that wasn't quite true. Anyway, so main content. Div role equals main is exactly the same semantically as main. And it's very similar for things, other elements like footer. You might have a div with a class of footer. You could give it a role of content info instead. That's the landmark that corresponds to footer. Or you could just give it a footer element and it will provide that role for you. And HTML5, as I say, brings these landmark roles automatically. So it's a bit of auto-magicalness provided by HTML there. If you use any of these elements, then you get the landmark roles for free, with some caveats, but actually they're really helpful ones, as we'll see. So header is the header, nav corresponds to navigation, then you've got main, you've got section, form, aside is complementary, and footer is content info. But there's some helpful caveats here. The first one is that if you've got a header or a footer, they're only counted as landmarks if they're the page global ones. So it stops you from having multiple landmarks when you may not have meant to. And also, if you've got a section element or a form element, the only ones of those that will be counted as landmarks are ones that have an explicit label. The reason being, you don't want to be too noisy with your landmarks. So a section element on its own with some content is not a landmark, but if you put a heading in that section and you associated the heading as the section's label by using something like aria-labeled by, pointing to the ID of the header, then that is labeled and then that will become a landmark. So there's some golden rules about landmarks. The first one is landmarks are for an overview of the content on the page, but headings are for the fine-grained navigation. So they're doing different things. If we go back to that example of the Wikipedia article, then the landmarks are going to broadly say something like search is up in the top. It's not spatial, but search is there. Main content is also available, and some navigation is available. Now, in actual fact, on Wikipedia, there are more than 3 landmark regions because there's different types of navigation, and there's more than just search at the top. But there are generally not that many landmarks, especially when you compare it to the number of headings that are in a substantial article like this. So expect to have fewer landmarks than headings for sure. I mean, this is quite an extreme example. Another one is try and use relatively few landmarks, but cover all the content on the page. And again, Axe will warn you about this, as Marcy said in her talk. The covering all the content on the page is generally just so that things are neat. And using the fewest number of landmarks as you can is a good idea because you want to quickly give the user an overview of what's on the page. And if you've got more than one of the same type of landmark, then it's a really good idea to differentiate them by using labels. So if I have a page with 2 nav elements on, that's 2 navigation regions, I don't actually know what the difference is between those unless I look inside them, but that defeats the object of the overview. So I could give them labels. I've used aria-label here, which imparts an invisible label. And I've called one of them site and one of them page. So we know that one of them is about navigation around the site and one is about navigation on the current page. It would have been better, though, if I'd have used visible headings and aria-labeled by, as I mentioned earlier, and there might be an example of that coming up. One more thing, there's no need to mention the type of the landmark in the label. If you were to say site as the label for this navigation region, then a screen reader is almost certainly going to say site navigation. Those are the default settings for most screen readers. So if you were to say site navigation as the label, you'd actually hear site navigation, which is not what you want. But I said landmarks are great, you know, they could help everybody. I think we're missing something here. What about keyboard users? Now, I couldn't actually find a computer keyboard picture that was like really cool, so this is a musical keyboard. But what about keyboard users? And you know what? What about mouse users as well? That's just a cute fluffy mouse because why not? So there is a landmarks extension which I didn't originally write. It was David Todd from IBM back in the Firefox days, Firefox original format of extensions before HTML5. My colleague Steve Faulkner suggested that I update it to support the HTML5 landmarks, and so I did, and the Paciello group generously donated that development time. And then web extensions came along, and I rewrote it so that it works on different browsers, and took it on as a pet project. So I'll just show you an example of it in use. Actually, I'm going to struggle because I haven't installed it on this machine. If anybody's got the Wi-Fi, if anybody could help me with the Wi-Fi whilst we are, I could do some questions perhaps. If I could connect to the Wi-Fi, I could install it.
I'll give you a hotspot.
Yeah. Apologies. If anybody's got any questions about it now whilst we're fiddling about with this, then...
I'll give you a question and I'll try and set this up for you. So, is there a danger of adding too many navigation landmarks to a page? For example, primary and secondary navs and breadcrumbs and footer navs. Too much? Question mark.
There is, and that's why it's really important to differentiate between them. And I'd love to show you an example of doing that if I can get this. Yeah. So if you have more than one of the same type of landmark, then you do run the risk of providing too much information. You want to give a quick overview to people. So there is a danger of that, but sometimes there are legitimate reasons why you would need to provide so many landmarks, which is why I haven't given you any hard numbers in this, because it does depend. So I'm just going to quickly switch back to this. I'm going to go and find the browser extension. I'm going to add it. I know where the button is, fortunately. I believe it's doing its trick.
I think it is.
It's a really small extension as well. It's only about 30K. So one of the things that... oh, it's almost here. So the first thing that happens is you get an overview of landmarks in this pop-up over here. You can use the keyboard to move between. We've got a banner, we've got navigation, we can skip straight to the main element, and we've also got this footer element at the bottom. Okay, so there's also a sidebar which can be used, and you can toggle all of the landmarks. So I just want to show you a very quick example. That was what it's like for a user, but it's got some developer tools in it as well. And I just want to very quickly show you an example of that. So here is a web page that I made copying from Wikipedia about wombats. And you can see that there's lots of different landmarks in here, and it's all very neat. But there are two navigation landmarks, and they are both called navigation. So what you can do is you can fire up the developer tools to figure out what's going on here. There's a magnifier there which takes you to the element that is relevant here. So that's the main site navigation. And what I want to do is associate the World of Wombats site title that's visually next to it with the actual navigation region. So I'm going to add an attribute, an ID equals site title. Did I spell site title correctly? And then I'm going to add aria labeled by site title. And then you may have noticed in the sidebar there it changed. And then it's always useful when you are doing these things to do it visually for everybody. So I'm going to go into here. I'm going to edit this as HTML. I'm going to put a paragraph in. So I've put on this page, and then I'm going to go back and find that navigation landmark. I'm going to add an attribute. And we see that now we've got on this page navigation. I'll just close the DevTools. And you can see that those labels are reflected. So if you're a developer, you can now visualize what the landmarks are on the page and what your users will get. And if you're a user who uses the keyboard or the mouse, you can see how many landmarks there are on the page and benefit from landmarks like screen reader users can. And that is about it. I will turn it over immediately to questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. I like the wombat example. It's very cute. So a couple of questions on the website. Is it safe to not use the role attribute as well as HTML5 elements? Which browsers don't support the HTML5 landmark roles?
Support for landmark roles is really, really good in both browsers and in assistive technologies. It used to be the case that we would recommend that you put main role equals main. It still can help people who are maybe using older versions of assistive technologies, so it doesn't hurt at all to do that because you're just giving it the role that it should get automatically anyway. So there could still be a case for doing that in order to support people who don't have the latest assistive technologies, but that won't be the case forever.
Okay, and then are landmarks useful for drag and dictate users?
Oh, yes. Landmarks are useful for everyone. Trying to get back to my slides, and I can't, but there's only one that said, thanks for listening, any questions? So, and acknowledgements, which you'll have to look at later. So, yeah, landmarks can be very useful for people who want to use their voice to get around the page as well. That's a brilliant question.
Okay, that's it. Raf, anyone in the audience? Yep. So, yeah.
Hiya, great talk, Matthew. Do you know what support is like for landmarks using when you've got a website in a different language other than English?
In terms of, well, the roles are standardized. I don't know, I mean, if the labels that you provide could be localized, but the roles themselves are standard. Now, I've not used different locales, so I'm not entirely sure, but I don't see why they couldn't be presented differently. I mean, if I did a translation of this into a different language, it would see content info, but it would probably say the appropriate word in that language. So I think, I hope that would be a user interface level problem, so therefore quite easily solvable.
Okay, thank you. Actually, one other question, if I may. You said Dragon users can use landmarks. Do you mean with the add-on that you've got there, or without?
This is focused on keyboard users, so there isn't anything specifically in here for Dragon, but my understanding is that it supports landmark roles. Hopefully that's right.
Cool, yeah. I guess I was just wondering how the user would know that they were there.
Well, this is a problem with landmarks, is being invisible. I mean, I guess you could, if you just hoped there was a main region, you could say, go to the main region. But yeah, it needs them to be exposed. So I suppose this may well help. I haven't actually tried this with Dragon. I will go away and do so.
Thank you.
So I spent quite a bit of effort prepping a nice, clean presentation environment with no notifications and got my clicker working and everything, and then realized browser profile has been reset. So
I
That was
have
a lesson.
one last question. The extension that you did, it does cover both the role and the actual HTML tags, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't differentiate both in the names that it provides, does it?
So if a label is provided, it will show you the label first. So in this case,
No, I mean for the role, like if it is made by a div with a role, it's not going to mention it, is it?
it will show up divs or other elements that have been given landmark roles, yes.
Okay.
It's not just HTML5.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Matthew. I'm Graham. Is there guidance or a recipe or something that would help use landmarks within an application type site? So if you've got groups of buttons that do something, or a way of helping the user navigate around a complex application page as opposed to a content page?
There are some general things, like, so if it's an email application and you've got a list of messages and you've got the message content and then you've got navigation above that, then those sound like separate landmarks. So you might have a labeled section element for the list of messages, and you might have another region for the message content, and then you might have your navigation at the top and probably a footer and maybe a banner. If it's that sort of thing, you don't need too many, because within one of those regions you can use headings to navigate and other techniques, but that's just one example. Probably could talk to you about other ones afterwards.
Thank you.
Hello. Would you ever landmark to an invisible area, like say that you wanted navigation specific to people who, who needed assistive technology, didn't navigate? So I'm just thinking of the on the page section. Would you, is it meant to point to visible navigation always, or just, can it be other technologies as well, visible?
I think it's dangerous in general. I think it could be dangerous to have a big chunk of content that is hidden from a large group of users. I understand that, for example, you might want to hide decorative icons from screen reader users. In some cases, you do see things that are visually hidden for screen readers specifically, and that can have a use. But generally, I think if there was so much content that you were thinking of surrounding it in a landmark and it wasn't visible, that might raise some warning bells that maybe that's not necessarily an appropriate pattern. I mean, there could be cases, but generally, if you're going to hide that much that it would go in a landmark, I'd be wanting to look at the reasons behind that.
Thank you.
Just do one more, Ruff. Yeah. Yeah, it's I hear that in front.
Hiya. Do assistive technology users have a way of actually discovering what landmarks are available through the interface of the assistive technology itself? If not, or perhaps in addition to that, might you recommend putting that information like on the accessibility statement or in some help documentation or somewhere on the page?
Generally, if somebody's using a screen reader or maybe a screen magnifier or some specific assistive technology, they have access to this information. And the imbalance was actually that if you're a keyboard-only user or just anybody else who might find this useful, it wasn't available, but it is in there. So the idea of this was to expose that. Hopefully, eventually, it could still be at the stage, even amongst assistive technology users, of needing some awareness raising. But I think landmarks have been out for about 7 or 8 years now, so the support is and the awareness is building and has built up quite well.
I guess I'm thinking of any sort of non-standard ones, for a particular application, maybe if you've labelled it manually, kind of thing.
The great thing about landmark regions are that they are standard, so it's really good to stick to the standard ones, but if you can't, because you need to convey this is an important region, like it's my list of messages or it's my email, you can use a section and label it or other means. And that wouldn't be standard, but it would still be useful. None of them would be discoverable unless you used something like this or an assistive technology. But if you did use one of these, you would automatically get that information. So you can specify a custom landmark region and it would show up in here or assistive technologies.
Thank you.
Okay, Matthew, thank you so much. A round of applause, please.
Thanks for listening.
Okay, so I just want to say a few quick thank yous before we go. Al, again, what you guys don't know is Al's given me a whole bunch of his personal time over the last few months to help me understand how to run an event like this, so thank you very much, Al. And then you can't run an event like this by yourself, so Raf from Sainsbury's makes everything run smoothly, does all the, I don't think it's the fun stuff, but you seem to like doing it. And then we've got Kath and Ben as well, 2 volunteers. You'll probably see them on the door helping get people signed in. So give a round of applause for everyone, please. Then we'll try and do one round of applause for all the sponsors. So Barclays and Sainsbury's. Again, these events wouldn't happen without them. Orla, we ate into your break time, I'm sorry. From My Clear Text and the guys from Meetup Video. Thank you very much. Then a last check for litter, please. And there was some important news on Slido. All the seats have a table built into them, which I had no idea. Somebody wanted cup holders. We have a table. It's in the right-hand armrest. This is... Someone broke it. Someone broke.
Missing.
Okay, so someone broke. So in June, you have to strategically choose your seat. As I say, check out everything that's going on for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Not everything is happening on the 16th. Some stuff is before and after, so check out the website. Raf and I are working on dates for June and beyond, so you will hear about those in the next few weeks, I expect. So yeah, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. Oh yeah. And please check out our YouTube channel. All the videos from previous meetups, or most of the previous meetups, are on there. And there's a live stream from today. So, yeah, lots of good content on there. All right, we'll see you in the pub.